Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we are making this v-neck halter top with mesh on the bottom section. This is a super beginner friendly tutorial, but if you don't know all the stitches, make sure to check out my ultimate beginner tutorial to make sure you know all of them. So, quick side note, for this video and my next couple videos, I am using a new mic, but I was having some issues with figuring out how to make it work properly, so I decided to just voice over my next few videos so that you can hear me and so everything makes sense. So if things don't perfectly line up with what I'm actively doing, that's why, because I'm voicing over and just watching the video as I'm saying all of this, but hopefully it does still make sense. I'm so sorry because this isn't how I like to do my videos, but it's better than having to re-record the entire video. So that's what my solution is for my next few videos, and then eventually we will be back to my normal of saying everything live in the moment. Otherwise, let's get into our materials. First, I have a 4.25mm hook, a darning needle, scissors, and wait for acrylic yarn. We also have stitch markers. We technically only need 3, but feel free to have a couple extra just in case. If you don't have stitch markers, just use bobby pins. First, we're going to make a slip knot. And we're going to do a row of foundation single crochets. So chaining 2, going through the side 2 loops of your first chain, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 1, and yarn over, pull through 2. Then go into the next side 2 loops, pull through those 2, yarn over, pull through 1, and yarn over, pull through 2. And you're just going to repeat this the entire row until this reaches what you want to be your base length. But also, this is our base that we're going to be working up from for our bust section and down from for our mesh rows. This length shouldn't be all the way around your entire band of your top. It should leave extra room because we are doing a crisscross tie for this top. And this isn't one where you want barely any extra room in the back. You actually want a lot of extra room in the back, just so that you have enough room for it to tie and so that when you're wearing it, you can actually tie it as tight as you need. But make sure it is covering enough where if that width were to be your bust section, that would cover as much as you want it to. Okay, so I just finished my first row, and now what we're going to do is chain 2, turn our work, and do 1 double crochet into the first stitch. Then we're going to chain 1, skip 1, and double crochet. Chain 1, skip 1, and double crochet. And we're just going to repeat that all the way down the rest of this row. Coming up to the end, you're either going to have 2 stitches and a chain left or 3 stitches and a chain left. What you're going to do if you have 3 stitches and a chain left is chain 1, skip 2 stitches and do a double crochet, and then do 1 more double crochet into the last stitch. If you have 2 stitches and a chain left like I do, you're going to only skip 1 and do a double crochet and then do 1 last double crochet into that 3rd stitch. Starting our next row, we're going to chain 2 and turn our work, and then we're going to do a double crochet into that first double crochet from our last row. So that will be into our 2nd stitch. And then we're going to chain 1, skip 1, which you're skipping the gap, and double crochet into the double crochet from the last row. Chain 1, skip the gap, and double crochet, and repeating that all the way down the row. So your gap should be lining up exactly. You shouldn't ever have the gaps not lining up. Into the last, we're doing a double crochet and then 1 double crochet into the chain. So every row after this is going to look the exact same. You're going to have your chain 2 and a double crochet at the beginning, chain 1, skipping 1, double crocheting all the way the rest of the row, and your last 2 stitches are going to be your 2 double crochets. So I'll come along with you for 1 more row, chaining 2 at the beginning, turning our work, double crocheting into the 2nd double crochet from the last row, chain 1, skip the gap, double crochet. chain 1, skip the gap, double crochet. And we're going to do this all the way across the row, just like we've been doing for our past 2 rows. And again, you're going to repeat these rows until it reaches the length that you want it to be. So there's no set measurement, just measure it up to yourself and make it as long as you want it to be. You're having that band section right under where your bust section would start and holding it up to see how far down you want those mesh rows to reach. Doing our last 2 double crochets, the second one being into the chain, and there we go. We're going to repeat these rows until it reaches the length that you want it to be. Okay, so I just finished my last mesh row. I ended up doing 8, and now what we're going to do now is chain 1 and cut off our work, pull through, and then now we're going to turn it back so that the band section foundation row is at the very top. Now what we need to do is count however many stitches you have in that foundation row. So I have 51 stitches. The ideal would be to have an even number of stitches, but it doesn't really make too much of a difference. So what we're going to do is go halfway across. So I'm going to go into my 25th stitch. So basically, if you have an odd number, just do half of it minus 0.5. So if I had 21, I would do 10. If I had 31, I would do 15. And then you're going to put your stitch marker into that stitch. Now what we need to do is figure out where the highest point that you want it to be is. So you could either make this like right at like the edge of your shoulder, so it's decreasing all the way down towards the middle, or you could make it closer to the middle so that the V isn't such a dramatic decrease. But I'm going to do basically as far out as I can, but you just want to check and make sure that you're measuring to this only for the front, because you don't want the decreases to start in the back, you want them to only be in the front. You also want to make sure that if you decide to make it a really wide v-neck, that you are confident that it's not going to decrease too fast, because you still want to make sure you have enough coverage. So I'm going to go basically 4 gaps from each side and put my stitch marker in on both sides. So now what we're going to be doing basically is the same number of stitches for these rows and then decreasing down to here. But basically, because we're only working one direction, it's going to be same stitches, decreasing, increasing, and then same stitches. In order to figure out how high you need it to be, you're going to make just like a simple chain row to kind of count how high you want these rows to be at the highest point. So just chain that amount and measure it up to yourself to see how much coverage you need. And once you reach that amount, then you can use it as your number for these rows. So I'm going to be doing 18 stitches for these rows. So now I'm going to undo my chain. And the one thing that you can always adjust is if the length in between the middle and the highest point is super far away, you can make your highest point even higher so that the v-neck is just as dramatic, but it's not getting so low that it's further than you want it to be. Also, if for example you're decreasing from rows 10 to 15 and then increasing rows 15 to 20, you'll have 5 decreases. So make sure your total number at the highest point minus your number of decreases is a height you're okay with. And you can find your number of decreases by counting how many rows are between your left or rightmost stitch marker and your middle stitch marker. So it doesn't matter if you choose the left or the right one, but for example, I could choose the leftmost one and my middle one and count how many stitches are in between there to figure out the number of decreases I'm going to be doing. So for example, if my highest point is 15 stitches and you have 5 rows between your stitch markers, 15 minus 5 would be 10, so make sure that you're okay with the height being 10 stitches at the middle. Again, you can check this by chaining 10 and measuring to see would that be okay at the middle, and of course this applies for whatever number that you do have. If you're not okay with the height that you're finding for the middle, what you should do is move in both of your outside stitch markers, but make sure that you're moving in the same number. So let's say again you have them at row 10 and 20, you're going to move them into row 12 and row 18. So they're both moving in 2 in this example. And by doing this, your number at the middle, at the lowest point, is going to increase. So again, what you should do is repeat the process, counting how many stitches are between your stitch markers now that you've moved them in, and check that this new number is okay with you for how low down it's decreasing. And you can just repeat this as many times as it needs to in order to get it to a height you're fine with. So now what we're going to do is tie on our yarn in that top corner, and I like to do a double knot, and then you're going to put your hook in, and you're going to chain whatever amount that matches the amount you counted. And now what we're going to do is chain one extra and then start half double crocheting from the second chain all the way back down. Once you've made your last stitch, you're going to make sure that you're rotated the correct way so it's lined up towards the top, and you're not going to slip stitch in the first one, but you're going to slip stitch into the next one. And then you're going to do one slip stitch into the next stitch over, and chain one, and turn your work, skip those slip stitches and start half double crocheting into those half double crochets all the way back up to the top. Remembering that for these rows, we're doing the same number for every row, so we're not increasing or decreasing. Once you've made your last one, you're going to chain one, turn your work, and half double crochet all the way back to the bottom. And feel free to be counting during this just to make sure that you're keeping the same number, but you don't necessarily need to, just because we're not on an increase or decrease row where we need to make sure that we are only increasing or decreasing by one. And then not slip stitching into the first but into the second, and then the one right after that as well, chaining one, turning your work, and starting those half double crochets not into those slip stitches but into those half double crochets. At the top, chaining one and turning your work, and half double crocheting all the way back down, and you're continuing these rows until you reach your stitch marker. Doing our 2 slip stitches at the bottom. So here you have 2 options. Once you've done your 2 slip stitches after your half double crochet row, you will either be in the stitch that has your stitch marker in it, or your stitch marker will be in the next stitch over. Basically, if the stitch marker is in the same stitch that you're in right now, then at the end of the row that you're about to start in a second, you're going to decrease at the end of it. If it is still 1 stitch away, then you're going to do a half double crochet just like normal up this row, but then when you chain 1 to turn your work, you're going to do decrease at the beginning of your next row. So not the one that you're about to do, but at the beginning of your next row. If, for example, you're where my green stitch marker is that I just put in for an example, that's where you wouldn't do a decrease in the row that you're about to do, you do it in your following row. So starting my next row, my top is version 1, so what I'm going to be doing is chaining 1, half double crocheting all the way up to my last 2 stitches where I'm going to put a decrease. If your top is version 2, you're not going to decrease this row, you're just going to do your half double crochets like normal, and then join me with my next row, which will be your row 1 of the decreases, but it will be my row 2. So to do a decrease, what you're going to do is yarn over, go through the first 2 loops of your first stitch, pull through, and then without pulling through those 3 loops that are on your hook, you're going to yarn over again, go into your next stitch, pull through, and then you should have 5 loops on your hook. Now what you're going to do is yarn over and pull through those 5 loops. So that makes a decrease. So now going on to my next row, my second row of those decreases, I'm going to chain 1 and turn my work, yarn over going to the first, pull through, yarn over going to the next, pull through, and yarn over, pull through all 5, and then do my half double crochets all the way down the rest of the row. I do realize at some point that I'm accidentally going into the back loop here, which I don't really know why I started doing that, but feel free to go in the back loop if you so please, but you don't really need to. It works completely fine if you go into both loops, but I don't know, I just wanted to explain that in case you noticed it. And then making sure you're doing those 2 slip stitches at the bottom, taking away your stitch marker because you don't need it anymore, and then you can chain 1 and turn, half double crochet up your row, and doing your decrease into 2 stitches at the end of this row. So your decreases again should only be at that side of the top. They should never be down here. Making my decrease, chaining one and turning my work, and we're just going to continue this pattern until we reach our next stitch marker, the one that's in the middle. And if you feel like your rows are going by too fast and it's getting way too far down, feel free to customize it a little bit and skip a decrease or two so that you're not going down to a small amount that quickly. It won't be an exact V-neck shape anymore, but it will give you that coverage that you're looking for. There also is an option to add like a little tie at the end if you want to, but that doesn't entirely solve the issue if it's like way too little coverage. Okay, so as you can see, this is an example of where the stitch marker is in the next stitch, not the one that I'm in right now, which means the row that I'm about to do is going to be a decreased row, and my next row is going to start those increases. But for this one, I'm just going to end up doing the same number of stitches just for convenience, and doing those half double crochets into each stitch in this row, chaining one, turning my work, and then we're going to start our increases, because this row lines up with the stitch marker. So we're going to yarn over and go into the first stitch, making one half double crochet like normal, and then we're going to yarn over and go back into that exact same loop and make another half double crochet, and then we're going to do half double crochets just like normal for the rest of the row. And then do your 2 slip stitches like normal at the bottom. You can take your stitch marker out, and then chain one, turn your work, do half double crochets like normal, except for increases at the end of the row. So start off with those normal stitches, and then an increase with 2 stitches at the end. And I will say with half double crochets like this, your last stitch is not really going to seem like it's a stitch, so just like look a little bit closer, make sure you are going into the last stitch, because they can get a little bit invisible if you're not paying too much attention. Then chaining one, turning my work, an increase at the beginning, and then half double crocheting the rest of the row. And then we're just going to keep increasing until we reach that highest point again and we reach our next stitch marker. And then we're going to be doing rows of those same number of stitches. So for this next row, I'm increasing to make my original amount that I started with, which means it's going to be my last increase row. And then from now on, I'm just doing normal rows with no increases. Just half double crocheting into every stitch, chaining one at the end, turning my work, half double crocheting back down, 2 slip stitches, just like we were doing at the beginning. And then to make up for the fact that I have an odd number, instead of doing my 2 slip stitches like normal, I'm just going to immediately slip stitch into my last stitch instead of just like slip stitching into the first and then slip stitching into the second. And then I'm going to chain one and cut off my work. And now we have a couple of things left. We have the halter straps and the back tie. So what I'm going to do first is make the back tie. And so what I want to do is make a slip knot and then chain a long amount. Basically, this is going to be crossing back and forth, so you need it to be long enough to be able to reach across that space. So this is 100 chains, and I'm just going to measure it up to check whether this is going to be long enough. That looks pretty close, so I'm just going to do 10 more just to be safe. And then 1 extra and cut it off. And now what we're going to do is going to the top 2 corners. So putting our hook through, grabbing the chain, and pulling it through where our hook is. Going to the second top corner, grab the yarn and pull it through. And then we're going to go about halfway down and pull it through. And just make sure that you're doing the same amount on the other side, so counting it and then pulling it through. And then I'm going to go a couple up from the bottom and pull it through on both sides. And there we go, our back tie is done. And then we're going to add our straps. So I did make a pretty silly mistake here. I just was totally too lazy to try it on and make sure that I put the straps in the right spot, which is crazy because I've made too many tops to make that mistake. But I will just say, at this point, you have the back tie. It will stay up on its own as long as you're not moving around. So just try it on at this point and make sure it's centered perfectly on your back. And then you can use those stitch markers again, mark where you want your straps to be. So use 2 stitch markers, mark where each strap would be, and then you can take it off and do your straps into those spots. Instead of like I was doing and I was just guesstimating and it ended up being completely wrong and I had to undo it and whatever. So make sure you're paying attention and not being lazy like me, because I hate measuring and it bites me in the butt sometimes. So you're going to tie your yarn on, and then you're going to chain a long amount. Whatever ends up looking good to you is good. I usually don't count at this point, but I would say you probably are going to need more than 50. Then do 1 extra and cut it off. And then just make sure you do that exact same number on the other side, or at least a pretty similar amount. So if you don't want to count, just measure them up next to each other, see if it's similar, good enough. And then you're going to chain 1 and cut that off, pulling through. And then now we have that optional middle tie that, again, it might not make too much of a difference, but if you want it, feel free. Basically what you're going to do is just take your yarn and chain probably up to 10. You could do an actual bigger tie where it's a bow, and then you would probably need maybe 20 at least. But for mine, I'm just literally doing a knot. And then I try to go pretty much up to the end of the yarn because I'm just using scrap yarn for this, and then pull it through. But if you're crocheting out of your ball of yarn, just do it up to then and then cut it off normal we would for the rest of the top. And so this is just how to do the tie. I thought I would just throw this in case it didn't make a ton of sense, but mine is again literally just tied on really simply, not too complicated. You'll just pull it through and tie it on, and you can adjust this by going more rows apart or less rows apart depending on how you want it to look. And then your last step is weaving in your ends. So I'm just going to find a random end on here, and the easiest way to thread your darning needle is to lay the yarn over the top of your needle, pinch it and pull it off, and then wiggle it through the eye. And then you can start going through the stitches, through the sides of the stitches, and then once you reach pretty much the end of your end, you can cut it off. And then you'll just copy that same thing with all the rest of your ends, and there you go, you are done. thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, make sure to let me know down below and I will do my best to help. If you make one of these, please make sure to tag me when you post it because I would love to see it. And make sure to check out my Depop for tons of crochet stuff that I'm selling, including this. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye! Oh, yeah, yeah.